The following is a parody. It is definitely not a true story and is intended to evoke humor. My name is Ron K. Treston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Foundation of Barn Door, Oklahoma, and this is what I call my midday musings. I'm here with my pet, J. Stewart Russell. Say hi. And I'm enjoying my 5th cup of coffee for the day. Today I've invited a special guest, my long-term friend, Dr. Harry DeVar. Harry, welcome to Barn Door.
Thank you for having me, Ron.
Harry, let's jump right in with some questions that perplex me. As you know, Jesus Christ spoke about the sun being darkened, the moon refusing to shine, and the stars falling from heaven in Matthew chapter 24, verses 29 and following. Now, you've been a partial preterist for a long time, and you believe, do you not, that the passing away of the heavens and the earth that Jesus mentioned here and in verse 35 refers to the Roman destruction of the Jewish kingdom in AD 70, or at least to the passing away of the Mosaic economy by AD 70. Do we agree here?
Of course, that is the standard preterist interpretation, and it is agreed upon by virtually all preterists.
As you know, the Apostle John recorded in Revelation 21, verses 1 and following, that the new heavens and earth appeared precisely because the old heavens and old earth had passed away. Now, would you agree that the new cosmos replaced the old cosmos and that the new covenant had replaced the Mosaic covenant by AD 70? And would you agree that the heavenly New Jerusalem, bride of Christ, replaced the earthly old Jerusalem harlot city no later than AD 70?
Of course, that is the standard preterist interpretation, and it is agreed upon by virtually all preterists.
So we agree that the new covenant arrived when the old creation was destroyed by AD 70. Now consider the following syllogism. The first premise is that Revelation 21 verse 4 shows us that when the new creation would arrive, that the former things, including death, sorrow, crying, and pain, would pass away. The second premise is that the prophets and apostles elsewhere taught that God would abolish sorrow and death at the resurrection of the dead. Therefore, we can conclude on this basis, that the general resurrection took place in AD 70. So, Harry, do you catch the power of this? You are a full preterist. Romans 8 tells us that the whole creation was subjected to futility and groaned and labored with birth pains, but was delivered from the bondage of corruption at the time of the glorious liberty of the children of God, the resurrection of the dead in AD 70, when the labor pains of the tribulation and the former things of the law passed away.
That's a lot to swallow, Ron, and you may be right. But of course, that doesn't make me a full preterist. And keep in mind that I do teach that the old heavens and earth and their elements were destroyed by fire, as we read in 2 Peter 3, and this echoes Christ's teaching in the Olivet Discourse. And it is clear to me that this refers to the destruction of the old Jewish system in AD 70. 2 Peter 3 replicates the language of Jesus by communicating that Christ's coming as a thief in the night would occur at the day of the Lord. And of course, Peter informs us that the new heavens and new earth arrived at the day of God, which took place in the 1st century.
But Harry, 2 Peter 3 verse 7 tells us that this was the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. Is there any other judgment day, Harry, than the one that the prophets said would take place at the day of the Lord? Isn't that why Revelation 20 also depicts the judgment day as occurring at the time of the final resurrection?
Well, you do make a good point there, Ron, but I am not prepared to make that connection at this point.
Well, let's look at another passage then. The angel told Daniel in Daniel chapter 12, the first 4 verses, that the great tribulation, the same tribulation that Jesus alluded to in the Olivet Discourse, which you and I agree took place in the years leading up to AD 70, would end at the time of the end with the deliverance of Daniel's people and the resurrection at the same time, the resurrection of, quote, those who sleep in the dust of the earth, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. This is the same resurrection language Jesus picked up on in John 5 and Paul in Acts chapter 24 to determine the resurrection that took place on the last day. In that same prophecy of Daniel, the angel told the prophet that the wise and righteous will shine like the brightness of the stars forever and ever, which Jesus said in Matthew 13 would take place at the end of the age, which is the time of the gathering of the elect, according to Matthew 24, the same time of the end of the age chronicled in the last vision of Daniel, which we agree took place in AD 70, after the times and half the time, when the, quote, shattering of the power of the holy people ended. Daniel 12, verse 7. You see, Harry, this is why you never debated me. We agree on virtually everything. I could be your brother from another mother. And there's more. The Apostle Paul spoke about Christ's parousia and our, quote, gathering together to him in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 1. And he used a nearly identical verb that Jesus used in the Olivet Discourse for the angelic gathering of the elect at the Son of Man's coming, or parousia. And there is no question that he was speaking about the same parousia and the resurrection of the dead as Paul had taught the Thessalonians in his first letter in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. Then the apostle told us in the next verse that the parousia and the gathering would take place at the day of Christ, which of course we see also in 1 Thessalonians 5, which you and I agree was in AD 70. But check this out. The next few verses inform us that the man of sin would oppose and exalt himself above all that is called God, so that he sits in the temple. By the way, that's a quote from Daniel chapter 11, verse 36, regarding the abomination of desolation that happens at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Paul taught that this was the same man of perdition who will be consumed and destroyed by Christ at the parousia, with the breath of his mouth and the brightness of his coming. 2 Thessalonians 2:8, compare with Isaiah 11:4, and of course Revelation 19 verses 15 and 20 and 21.
Wow, that is compelling, and I know some full preterists make a big to-do about Matthew 16 verses 27 and 28, where Jesus declared, "For the Son of Man will come in the glory of his Father with his angels, and then he will reward each according to his works." And then he said, "Assuredly I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." I have always struggled with the fact that this language of Christ coming to reward each person according to his deeds is the language used elsewhere in Scripture about the final judgment at the time of the general resurrection. For example, as in Revelation 20, verse 12. It is difficult to skirt the fact that here Christ connected the time of his coming, or parousia, with this judgment, and the concept that some of the first disciples would live to see it.
Well, that is right. And Revelation 11 tells us that the last trumpet was the time for the dead to be judged, and for rewarding of God's servants, the prophets and saints, and those who feared his name, both small and great, the very language that John replicated in chapter 20, verse 12, where he spoke of the judgment of the dead, great and small, when he would reward each according to his deeds at the general resurrection, verses 11 through 15. And notice that Paul also connected the timing of the last trumpet with the parousia of Christ and the destruction of death through the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15 and in 1 Thessalonians 4. And this is precisely why in Matthew 25 in the Olivet Discourse, it shows us that this international judgment of the sheep and goats that Christ will do, and where he'll throw the wicked into the everlasting destruction of hellfire, it will occur at that time. That is, at the time of the coming of the Son of Man, which he introduced just verses earlier, that you and I admit took place in AD 70. And by the way, all these themes appear in Revelation chapters 19 and 20. And both prophecies are an apostolic exposition of Daniel chapter 7.
Your honorary PhD for writing books in your basement doesn't do you justice. You are a genius, Ron, and you are 100% correct.
So you see, Harry, you simply cannot separate the timing of the abomination of desolation, the Great Tribulation, and the destruction of the old cosmos from the timing of the parousia of Christ, the resurrection of the dead, the arrival of the new creation, judgment day, the end of sin and death, and on and on. It's all or nothing proposition. Now catch the power of this. These events either all took place around AD 70 or they are all future. You can't splice and dice the clear texts of Scripture to fit your preconceived theology of partial preterism, Harry. Partial preterists think there are at least two distinct last trumpets, which signal two distinct comings of Jesus on two distinct judgment days at two distinct times of the end, which result in two distinct gatherings of God's elect, two distinct arrivals of God's kingdom, and two distinct dissolutions of two distinct new heavens and earth. You nor I believe this nonsense, Harry. Dr. DeVar, you are officially a full preterist.
No, I'm not.
Yes, sir, you are. You, my friend, are a textbook definition level full preterist. And that makes you a heretic just like me. And one of these days, your old buddies Ken Reentry, Drugless Wilson, Jeff Bourbon, James Black, Hamfrost, and your other evangelical pals may very well write you a letter requesting that you return soon and at hand to their version of orthodoxy. They may ask if you still believe in a future bodily, glorious return of Christ, a future physical general resurrection of the dead, and whether you still believe that history will end with the final judgment of all men. Then what will you say, Harry? Will you admit to them then that you're a full preterist?
Well, I would simply avoid answering their questions. Just because I don't admit to my denial of these things does not make me a full preterist.
Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. It's as clear as the nose on your face. Harry DeVar wants us to believe that he belongs to Holy Orthodoxy because he claims to believe in the Nicene Creed, but he does not agree with the Church Fathers when they wrote the words of the Creed and expressed that Christ is coming again with glory to judge both the living and the dead, because he places these events in AD 70, like us full preterists all do. Dr. DeVar does not agree with their creedal statement, I look for the resurrection of the dead and the life of the age to come, because he places the resurrection in AD 70 like all full preterists, and he correctly thinks the age to come already came and is the present Christian age, which began not in the future, like the futurist friends say, but in the first century, which all preterists teach. And Harry certainly doesn't agree with the Church Fathers' definition of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and neither do most other organized church-going Christians in America, by the way. Well, folks, we're out of time for today. Thank you for joining us at Barn Door for my midday musings. I am Ron K. Treston, and until next time. All right, so I'm Dr. Brock Hollett, author of 3 books, including Debunking Preterism, How Overrealized Eschatology Misses the Not Yet of Biblical Prophecy. I hope you enjoyed this short video and now have a greater appreciation for how full preterists attempt to convince partial preterists to adopt the heresy of full preterism. My book on preterism can be found by going to Amazon or by going to my author webpage at www.brocksaltar.com. That's like an altar, like a church altar. www.brocksaltar.com.